3.5% of people on the island of Montreal use a bike as their main method of commuting. That doesn't sound like a lot, and in a certain sense, it's not. Cars and public transit dominate commuting across the island, with walking in third place.
But citywide averages hide the local details. There's actually a large section of the city, almost 40 square kilometers, where cycling ranges from 5 to 22% of the commuting share. Montreal's cycling city isn't the majority of the island, but it exists and it's reasonably large.
The main cluster starts at the northeast edge of downtown and stretches to Outremont, Villeray, and Viauville. A smaller secondary hotspot of cycle commuting can be found to the southwest of downtown, between Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Little Burgundy, and Verdun.
Another thing that citywide averages don't show is growth. Back in 1996, this concentration of cycling was only starting to take shape. Every new census year after this shows a visible increase in cycling as a method of commuting, especially around the main cluster.
To put some numbers to it, over the 20-year span from 1996 to 2016, the highest rate of cycle commuting found in the city rose from 13 to 22%. In the same time, the area covered by our 5% threshold for a cycling hotspot massively expanded from 8 to 38 square kilometers.
If you're interested in urbanism and cycling like we are, it's easy to see the European heavyweights like Amsterdam and Copenhagen and wonder why we can't be more like them. But actually looking at the data shows that we are making concrete progress, especially if you think through a more local or neighborhood lens like we're doing here.
We've set a high bar here by focusing on cycle commuting, because work is usually an inflexible location that tends to be further away than other trips like stores and parks. But it's an important gold standard of bike friendliness because of how often you have to go.
So why did cycling take off in some parts of the city and not others? The obvious answer to us is infrastructure. On this bike lane map, you can see that the center of cycle commuting in the city also happens to noticeably have the densest and most connected series of bike lanes. We biked all over Montreal this summer, and this corner of the city really is the best built for it.
There's plenty of bike infrastructure elsewhere too, but it's not usually this consistent and practical to use. For example, both St. Leonard and the town of Montreal have some modest bike lanes that are moderately useful once you get there, but they're distinctly disconnected from any larger network. So actually getting there from other neighborhoods is a pain in our experience.
Over in the West Island, they actually have some respectable east-west routes, but we found traveling north-south to be a nightmare. Biking down Boulevard des Sources was a genuinely awful experience, and not just because we crossed the highway on-ramp and had a tire explode.
Whoa! A second possible explanation for Montreal's cycle commuting patterns is the location of jobs. It would make sense if boroughs with more local jobs could sustain more cycle commuting than boroughs whose residents had to travel longer distances to work.
This has to matter, but it's not as straightforward as it sounds. The 4 boroughs with the most bicycle commuting are only in the middle of the pack when it comes to local jobs per person. Granted, it probably helps that they're reasonably close to the big job center of downtown, but there are plenty of jobs and job centers elsewhere on the island.
Those peripheral job centers probably do have more people with jobs that really need a motor vehicle, for example to bring tools to a job site, but it's hard to imagine that this is so common that 5 or 10% cycle commuting is out of the question with better development and infrastructure.
With all of that said, there are parts of the city that really are job deserts. Montreal North, Côte Saint-Luc, and Pierrefonds-Roxborough all have very few local jobs, and they're not in great proximity to other large job centers, whether because of space or other barriers like train tracks. Choo-choo!
One final factor for bike commuting that we'll mention is elevation. The neighborhood of Côte-des-Neiges in particular is probably disadvantaged by its hilly geography. We've biked from there to downtown, going through Westmount, and let's just say it's quite the workout.
That's all for our look at bicycle commuting in Montreal. To summarize, bicycle commuting has actually grown a lot in Montreal over the past 20 years, mainly in the neighborhoods that built the most bike infrastructure and at least have a reasonable proximity to jobs. If you have anything to add, including personal experiences bike commuting, let us know in the comments.